Thank you, everybody, for being here. It is an honor to address the Earth-based or Earth-centered pedagogy special interest group of Pod Network. This is a presentation I like to call What I Learned in Pontevedra, a Degrowth Pilgrimage. It's not excessively academic, but it also does have some bearing on higher education. So I've given this presentation to friends and family, co-workers, and everybody seems to be a little dissatisfied at the end because that's what I'm aiming for. Something that is a little bit unusual, a little bit different, and doesn't fit very well in the box, so to speak. But anyway, enough about that. I just want to get started. I'm going to go at a fairly fast clip in the hopes that we might have some time left over for discussion. I did want to start, though, by saying that you might have said that I kind of had fear of flying. I hadn't flown on an airplane for 5 years. And in part, that was because of climate concerns. And I probably don't need to get into the details with this group, but as the BBC notes, mile for mile, flying is the most damaging way to travel for the climate. So, hey, please think twice before flying. That's all I can say. I had, though, been reading this book, The Future is Degrowth. And by the way, we also see the subtitle there, A Guide to a World Beyond Capitalism. That might be a definition of degrowth. But I would kind of question that because it was about a lot more than just capitalism. You could certainly argue that real existing socialism is just as driven by growth. And therefore, this definition isn't really adequate. But anyway, I liked the book. So when I had the opportunity, I decided that, yes, I would gladly get on an airplane and attend the 10th International Degrowth Conference and the 15th Conference of the European Society for Ecological Economics on June 18th through 21 of last year in Pontevedra, which is in Galicia, which is in Spain. And I had a twofold mission then. I was to make a presentation, I'll tell you more about that in a minute, and also to present this poster, Cycles of Gaia, on behalf of the Gaian Way. Yes, the Gaian Way was the organization that was actually sending me on this little trip. So, and I had the question, who would come with me? I thought my wife and my daughter might come. And I was pretty excited about that, but they both decided that they had other things that they would rather be doing. And so I resigned myself that this would be a solo trip. That can have its appeal as well. And I started reconfiguring mentally for that. I was facing a number of challenges, though, including a knee challenge, which my knee just gave out on me, and I thought I would be laid up for weeks. It turned out to be a torn meniscus, and I healed rather rapidly, but I was still limping around by the time that this trip came around. I also had a tooth challenge, as an emergency root canal just before my departure, and that was no fun. And also a geography challenge. Yeah, Galicia, I had never heard of this before. Apparently, it's the Celtic part of Spain. The only thing I knew about this area of northern Spain was that it was where the Camino de Santiago, the way is kind of known as a pilgrimage, Christian pilgrimage that people make through this part of the world, and you see a marker there. And all these pictures on this slide, by the way, are from Wikimedia Commons, but I did want to note that most of the photos, unless otherwise noted, that you're seeing in this presentation are just photos that I took on myself, except for the obvious things like this. This is from the New York Times. And this article, Shrink the Economy, Save the World, came out. It was published just before I left. And I took that as a good omen that degrowth was getting some real attention, because that was what this article was about. It was fairly positive. Oh, and one more challenge I had was packing. How was I going to get all this stuff on the airplane with me? I had to take that poster in that big tube. And I was worried that they wouldn't let me have 2 carry-on items. I definitely, or 3 carry-on items. I didn't want to check anything. I finally figured out I could put the backpack inside the suitcase and only had 2 items then. And so it may seem like a small thing, but I was pretty happy that I was able to go on the airplane. In fact, I was so excited when I got off the plane in Madrid that I stopped to take this picture in the beautiful Madrid airport. I set the tube down and I took this picture of my daughter. That's right, my daughter, Persephone, had decided to come with me after all. And it was her first time ever leaving the country. Uh, so, as I mentioned, I was so excited that I took this photo first thing. And then we hurried off. But where's the tube? Where is the poster tube that I brought with me that I was so proud of having carried onto the airplane? I set it down to take this photo and I forgot to pick it back up. And before you knew it, I was through the, customs, and there was no going back into the airport. I talked to the lost and found. But anyway, I made it to Pontevedra without the tube. And this is the bridge, the Puente. It's like a 4-hour train journey, by the way, to Pontevedra from Madrid. This is the Puente del Burgo, or the Burgo Bridge, across the Larez River. It's medieval. It's actually built over an older Roman bridge, and it's possibly the origin of the city's name, Pontevedra. Could be named after the Puente del Burgo. But we made it there, even though I was missing some things. The next day was cold and rainy. I think of, the Spain as sunny and Mediterranean, but not necessarily up there in the Celtic part of Spain. It's a whole different geography. And I didn't even have an umbrella. And everything was closed because it was Sunday. And then we were astonished by this apparition of Frida Kahlo. Now, actually, this is just a reflection of Frida Kahlo, a neon sign of Frida Kahlo caught in a window. I just thought it was I thought I would sprinkle in some artsy photos that I took in between everything else. But my first impression of Pontevedra was of density. It just seemed like a big city, even though really it's not a big city. It's just built that way. It felt like a little slice of Brooklyn or something dropped down in the middle of the countryside. And we did a little sightseeing on that first day. This is the Iglesias de Santa Maria la Mayor. I thought it was strange that they had a church named after the mayor, but it turns out that's actually means in Spanish sailors. It could be seen from the sea. It was the sailors would see this church and know that they'd made it back home. And then I ran into, as we were walking around in this same outing, I kind of not coincidentally ran into this little protest. And hopefully I remembered to share some audio with you. All right, hopefully that gives you an idea. It was a protest, I was told, against a cellulose plant. I was told it was a paper plant as big as Santiago de Compostela, which was a nearby city. And I was reminded of local struggles here at home in Louisiana against the massive Formosa plastics plant that they have been trying to build in this area for years. But my favorite part of this day was, and there's a sign for the conference, just to prove that the conference really was happening. There's a sign for it. That's what I came here for. And it says there in Spanish, are you addicted to growth? That's what the conference was about, right? Degrowth. My favorite part of this day was actually watching Persephone play around and climb around while I sat on a bench and rested my knee. There she goes, exploring some of the urban infrastructure of Pontevedra. And actually that evening, I did finally get my umbrella. We found a place that was open. And so I was prepared for the elements. And things really got started the next day, a Monday morning. Of course, I told you I was sent there by the Gaian Way. It's a new, you could say, spiritual, religious, philosophical tradition. We do emphasize the idea of daily practice, of meditation, outdoors, if you can manage it. And so I had this tiny little balcony, and this is my view outdoors from the apartment that we were renting. And just to give you a reverse view, this is the view from the street. You can see we were staying above a shoe store. I couldn't linger too long in the meditation because I had to get across the river to the School of Forestry Management, which is where the conference is being held. But actually, this first day on Monday was before the conference. It was kind of a pre-conference event, the 5th annual assembly of the degrowth movement. And this might be a good time to visit another definition of degrowth, one which kind of emphasizes the global aspect. You could say that degrowth is a reduction of production and consumption in the global north and liberation from the one-sided Western paradigm of development. This could allow for a self-determined path of social organization in the global south. And that global aspect to it all was very much on my mind at that meeting. It began with a joint statement from this duo, a Muslim woman and a Jewish woman, who stood up together and demanded an end to the genocide in Gaza. And indeed, that was a theme throughout the conference and our whole time there. You can see this map that they distributed. The conference distributed a map of the city, help you get around. And you see the watermelon logo there in the lower left-hand corner. Of course, the watermelon is a symbol of Palestine because of the colors of the Palestinian flag. We took a break that first day for lunch, and they got us out just in time to see this inspiring sight. And what you're seeing there is the arrival of a bicycle caravan. Now, of course, in Europe, everything is much closer together than in the United States, but still is impressive that people from many different countries got on bicycles and rode, kind of converging together over several days to get to this part of Spain, arriving in the rain even. And they were singing a song. So that was pretty cool. And let's see. Oh, yeah, you remember the backpack. You might have been wondering why I was telling you so much about the backpack that had managed to get into my suitcase. Well, this patch was on the back of my backpack. And so just after lunch, somebody saw it and recognized it and hollered out. She was actually a local from Galicia, but she had lived for a while in Houston, Texas, and so she recognized New Orleans. She hollered out, and when I told her that I'd been sent there by the Gaian Way, she immediately turned to her friend who was next to her, this guy, and introduced me to him, Manuel Casal, who considers himself also a Gaian. He knew about the Gaian Way, and we've been friends ever since. We struck up a conversation. We were just exchanging text messages even till today, exchanging a lot of information. Great connection to make. So this is what these kind of trips, hopefully, are all about. And I do have to say that that first day there was all ages were represented. It was lovely to be surrounded by so many people from so many nations, speaking so many languages, or I should say, speaking English with so many accents, and aspiring to such transformative work. We got a good comeuppance from a speaker from the Global South at the very end of that day's program, basically taking us to task that we weren't doing enough to end the genocide in Gaza, but it was delivered with love. And then that evening, my daughter got some cotton candy from a robot. And there's the photos to prove it. And we say that artificial intelligence is just a waste of time. I mean, look at that. It's incredible. Okay, so the next day, a colleague had suggested that I might solve my problem with the poster by going to a local print shop. And I thought to myself, well, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. But then I realized I could, because with all this internet technology, I was able to get a PDF, high quality PDF version of the poster. And using Google Translate, I was able to exchange emails with the print shop, and we were able to get it all arranged. And as I was walking there on the way, I saw this dance studio, which had the name of Getting Jiggy, which I just thought was kind of hilarious, and I had to take a photo. I was also impressed by the fact that they have stores that sell nothing but fruit there in Pontevedra. Uh, I confirmed that the poster was going to be printed to my specifications, and then the sun actually came out and shone through this fountain, and it was quite glorious. And then on this next square, I heard a street performer, a street musician performing one of these, a Galician gaita. That's a kind of a bagpipe. Did you know they had bagpipes in Spain? I told you it's the Celtic part of Spain, right? So yeah, they have bagpipes. They have bagpipes everywhere apparently. But it was so beautiful. It brought me to tears. And then we stopped by Disc Burgers to get some lunch with my daughter. I ordered combination plate number two, uh, or I ordered rather two combination plates, and we ended up with combination plate number two. So it was a little bit of a language barrier, but we persevered. And I finally got to the kickoff of the conference proper. And you can see here this panoramic photo that I took. In fact, if I can get it going, I found a site that allows you to embed these panoramic photos as panoramas so that I can actually scroll around here and show you that indeed there were 1,200 people here in this auditorium for the opening of the conference proper, which featured music and performers, and it was really pretty cool. But 1,200 people, it seemed like a lot. Seemed like a lot, and it seemed like a sign that, ironically or otherwise, degrowth is growing. So hopefully that panoramic photo gives you a sense of it. And this is a good place, I think, to pause and give another definition. What does degrowth mean? Degrowth is a planned reduction of energy and resource use designed to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. And of course, I do have to cite my source here. It is Jason Hickel, who's considered one of the luminaries of degrowth. I've been told that he's a good place to start if you want to read some entry-level stuff on, or more general stuff on degrowth. You might look up Jason Hickel. As I mentioned, they actually had music here, a performance, a live performance. Also played this song, a song about degrowth. I'm not going to play it for you now, but I did want to mention it, and I'll come back to that later. So that was in the evening. And the first full day of the conference then was on the Wednesday. And after I fetched my poster, the first thing I was really able to catch was this plenary on the politics of materials and the plastic industry. And here we see Ekaterina Cherkovskaya from the University of Lund in conversation with Alice Ma from the University of Glasgow, chaired by Vincenzo Pavone. And basically, they were talking about how we are in a global plastics crisis, and that it's not just, pollution, but it's also an immense carbon footprint, which contributes to climate change. And that the issue is really best understood as being driven by capital accumulation. So I was just learning some new language, to describe things that I already know, or already thought I knew, but I found some new language here. So they said we must cap production, and that most people support this idea of capping plastics production. Well, I was half a world away, but so much of this applied to the struggles back home where I live. New Orleans is at the one end of what's called Cancer Alley, which goes all the way up to Baton Rouge along the Mississippi River. And they call it Cancer Alley because of all the petrochemical plants that are located there, including Formosa Plastics that I mentioned earlier. And in fact, Cancer Alley was mentioned in this presentation, half a world away. After that, I went to and installed my poster. There it is. You can see proof that I actually did get the poster printed up. People were intrigued. They started lining up to take a look at it as soon as I got it on the wall. I could barely have time to post all the ancillary informational uh, pieces that I had with me, but I couldn't linger too long to talk with people about it because we also had arranged a walking tour of Pontevedra with my daughter. This is our tour guide, Pedro. Unfortunately, he had his eyes firmly shut for this one photo that I took of him, but he gave us a great tour. And we learned about the carnival traditions of Pontevedra. You can see shields there, medieval shields that are engraved in various places in the stone around the city. The medieval excavations near that bridge that we looked at earlier. Uh, in the lower left, you see a cruceros. That's like a crucifix on top of a tall column made of stone. There are 12,000 of these all around Galicia. Very impressive. But most impressive to me is what that middle photo represents. You see all the automobiles? No, you don't. You don't see any automobiles because they banned automobiles from the city center 20 years ago. And people are rightfully proud of that in Pontevedra. They've won awards there for pedestrian safety and urban design. And we were really struck by some of the similarities between Pontevedra and New Orleans, where I live. The Spanish architecture, I'm sure you've heard of the French Quarter, but as we all know, the French Quarter is really full of Spanish architecture because it burned down under Spanish rule. The seafood, the carnival traditions, the Catholic influence, even some of the same trees. But there are also a lot of differences. For one thing, New Orleans remain, even though New Orleans is an old city, predating the automobile, we still remain sadly autocentric. New Orleans made of different construction materials, flat as a pancake in New Orleans, flat as a swamp, which is basically where we live. And the size difference. New Orleans has a lot more population, but I got to tell you, Pontevedra just felt more urban in its design, I guess. That evening, my daughter was not attending the conference with me, but I wanted to make sure that she got to soak up some of it. So I took her to a film screening that evening that was associated with the conference. And we saw this film, then kind of an experimental film called 2020 The Walk. And you see the filmmaker there making the presentation. You can probably discern from her t-shirt that she's with Extinction Rebellion. And the movie was really just well, it was her backpacking, walking with a backpack with the Extinction Rebellion logo on it from Spain all the way to Helsinki. And basically, you just saw the back of her backpack as she walked and walked and walked through the landscape, while a very strident voiceover was played. You heard her voice narrating, really more of like a manifesto, talking about why she was making this pilgrimage, why she was walking from one country to the next. It was to protest the climate crisis. And she was talking about how future, if you're familiar with Extinction Rebellion, it's some pretty strident rhetoric. How future generations are doomed, that we're leaving nothing for our children, that every time you hear the sound of an airplane overhead, it's the sound of one more person who doesn't care about the future. And these were all things that I kind of, agree with and have communicated to my daughter about these things and my deep concern. That's even one of the reasons that I was there at the conference. But so I've talked all these things to my daughter, but not with the same tone necessarily. And I was a little bit worried as we watched this and we were, getting all this information that maybe she was becoming depressed or anxious. Well, as it turned out, though, neither one of us speak Spanish that well. I was just looking at the subtitles this whole time. As it turns out, my daughter's quite a bit shorter than me, and she was sitting behind a tall guy. All she could see was the back of his head. So she wasn't able to read any of those subtitles. So I didn't have to worry about a thing, right? It's all going to be great. Well, After that movie was over, they actually did then launch something called La Cultura Declara la Emergencia. You may have heard of this. This is part of Culture Declares Emergency. It started with local governments who were declaring a climate and ecological emergency. That's something I advocated for actually when I ran for office. Culture Declares Emergency was founded in 2019 in the UK with arts and culture individuals and organizations. This is the launch of the Spanish hub, a hub for Spain, La Cultura Declara la Emergencia. And we were there to bear witness. And then we had a really great dinner at one of the local restaurants. I finally got some vermouth. I'd heard a lot about the local vermouth. And did you know that they take red vermouth and white vermouth and they actually mix them together? I mean, that's one way that they serve it there. I couldn't believe it. And we got to watch as a seagull actually swooped down and snatched a hunk of meat off of another diner's plate. Really incredible. I didn't get a photo of that, sorry to say. That's my daughter Persephone having some dinner. So the next day was the summer solstice. In addition to being the summer solstice, it was Global Degrowth Day. I thought more people would be talking about the summer solstice, but I seem to be the only one. I attended a session that morning, first thing, on anarchy and degrowth, toward rebellious, prefigurative, and insurrectionary degrowth ecologies. With Alexander Dunlap, that's him in the baseball cap, he kind of yelled at us for a while, and that was actually kind of fun. And after that, a plenary on the circular economy. You may have heard about the concept of a circular economy. You know, that focuses on the idea of efficiency and technological solutions. Of course, degrowth emphasizes the need for a more fundamental restructuring of the economy, a reduction in overall consumption. The circular economy sometimes is presented as being compatible with economic growth. And that would be a conflict, of course, with the core premise of degrowth. So it's not that the two concepts are irreconcilable, but you have to be careful. Kirsty Hobson here argued for diversifying and degrowing the circular economy. There's a lot to think about. So anytime you hear people talking about the circular economy, you can ask some pertinent questions about, are we talking about a degrowth circular economy or what? It was a lot to think about, and I couldn't stay for the whole thing because I had to clear my head for a walk and clear my head before my own presentation. It was here in this room, and the session was called Challenging Dominant Values, Ideologies, and Imaginaries. There's actually 5 sessions crammed into this one room. So we all had a very limited amount of time, about 13 minutes. The first presentation was from Mallory Zinyu Jean. She was also the facilitator. Groups of people in China, asking them pretty much to prioritize what they would give up in order to stop climate change, what they would be willing to sacrifice, and lifestyle changes that they were willing to make. And there are a lot of interesting takeaways. The one thing that I would crystallize it down to is that people really don't want to stop eating meat. They'll give up a lot of other things that were really surprising to me. Come on, it's easy to eat a vegetarian diet, but apparently people don't necessarily all feel that. Then we had this one, Lucas Heck told us about a studies, because degrowth does emphasize recognizing how the work of care as part of the economy. It's largely unrecognized, but it needs to be recognized to have a more just and humane economy. Natalie Chris Abrams Chow told us about exploring the intersection of tourism and environmental values in indigenous communities of the southern Amazonian trapezium. And then Nate Rowetti talked to us about indigenous student discourse on environmental challenges and connections with degrowth, linking classrooms in Alaska and New Zealand. And it was a fascinating presentation, but what really was wild to me, I thought for sure that I would be the only session that kicked off by singing a song. But Nate went right before me, and he started his session with a song. He sang an indigenous song, and then I then I got up there and I also sang a song for my session. My session was the role of spiritual philosophies and communities in supporting and promoting degrowth. And I started off by singing the Homeric hymn to Gaia, because after all, the Gaian Way sent me on this trip. And I can't, recapitulate my entire session, but I will just share this one. Here's one slide from my session where I cited Thomas Lestar and Stephen Bohm. They argued that spiritual and religious beliefs generally, and eco-spiritual worldviews in particular, can play a role in sustainability transitions. And so the overall point of my presentation was how spiritual and religious and philosophical communities can play a role in supporting and promoting the concept of degrowth, which is something that I've been doing. I've made a presentation about degrowth to the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Coalition, my local group, and other groups of a similar nature. Raising awareness, getting people talking and thinking about degrowth. Meanwhile, while I was doing that, Persephone was doing this. She was going to a laundromat. This may not seem very significant to you, but to me it was huge, because not only had Persephone never done laundry at a laundromat before, I mean, she usually does it at our home, but she actually went out for the first time to do laundry at a laundromat in a foreign city where they speak a foreign language, and she navigated this all by herself. So I was very proud of her for managing that. It seemed like a big accomplishment and worth mentioning. I went on to yet another plenary session. This was on technology and democracy and the right to repair movement. And I'm sorry for the poor quality of this photo, but you can see, I think there, that's Han Solo from Star Wars, right? He's down there in the Millennium Falcon, fixing things up. And the reason that they were showing that picture is because the guy made the point in those first Star Wars movies that came out, the first three that came out, things are always breaking down. And then we see the characters fixing them. But that changed then, as the more Star Wars movies came out, that theme gets dropped. And you don't see the same kind of repair work going on in those later movies. And it's part of a shift in our culture as well, as illustrated by this meme. Can you fix my cracked iPhone screen? No, just buy a new one. The right to repair movement, which seems to have gained more ground in Europe, but is definitely picking up steam in the United States, advocates that we should have the ability to fix our stuff rather than just throw it out and buy a new one. It's a degrowth concept. I also attended a session where we walked around and took pictures through these cards. I didn't really understand exactly what that's all about, so I'm going to skip right over it. I did take this photo, though, that I thought was kind of cool, just of people walking around Pontevedra. And again, the car-free streets were a joy. It took me a while to figure out why I was feeling so relaxed, and I realized eventually it's because I wasn't having to jump out of the way of automobiles all the time. That evening, we attended the Protestival, they called it, for Global Degrowth Day in the Alameda Park in Pontevedra, where a bunch of people from the conference gathered. You can see a guy there with a "Degrow the Police" sign, which I thought was kind of funny because there's actually a police car in the background. Here is the local chapter of Greenpeace taking the stage. And they were followed by Extinction Rebellion, the Galician chapter. they were playing live when they did this. And no, they're not moving. This is not a slow motion video. They're just moving really slow, dressed all in these really striking costumes. Maybe you've seen this before. Extinction Rebellion is kind of famous for this. I don't even really know what it means, but it was certainly uh, compelling to look at. My daughter turned to me and said, "What have you taken me to?" Uh, it was powerful to bear witness and to stand in solidarity with an array of eco-activists uh, local to Galicia as they took the stage and shared their manifestos as the moon rose over the Alameda de Pontevedra on Global Degrowth Day with a crowd from the 10th Degrowth Conference. Now, the next morning, the final day of the conference, I was drawn to a session on contemplative pedagogy. They called it Embodying Degrowth, Healing from Alienation. Contemplative pedagogy is something I think a lot of us know about through POD. There is a contemplative pedagogy, mindfulness SIG as well that you may be aware of. I was, not certain if I should go to this session or try to explore new things because I feel like I know a lot about contemplative pedagogy already, but I was really glad that I did. I learned about radical rest as an act of refusal. And we had this plenary session on rethinking innovation, alternative approaches for people and planet. And I was reminded again in this session of this phrase, the imperial mode of living. It's a really useful phrase, I think. It's memorable, pithy. It's fairly easy to understand, but it refers to something that's very complex. It's something very complex, namely how everyday practices, the consumption patterns, the lifestyles of people like me, and quite possibly people like you, rely on the exploitation of resources, labor, and ecosystems in other parts of the world, particularly the global South. So a lot of times, my way of living is indeed the imperial mode of living. It's just how I've been brought up and how I generally conduct life as part of, my class in my set in as a American citizen, and it's problematic. It's something we need to change. And anyway, I'm trying to work this phrase into my active vocabulary. After that session, I went back to the second part of that contemplative pedagogy session. They had several more subcomponents that kind of flowed one into the next. We had a session on called Active Hope, how to turn eco-anxiety into contributions to care for the earth. And in this session, they showed us a short little video, a 1-minute video about plastic pollution. It was pretty powerful. But then they asked us to take a pen and paper and actually draw how that made us feel. And so here's my illustration. This is how it made me feel. And then we heard about, or actually heard poems from this woman, Alice Damiano, our relationship with the earth and the universe. She just read us some of her poems. They're really amazing, very kind of eco-spiritual. And the final session, I should mention, towards decolonizing our minds, reconnecting with nature, an exercise and sharing of experiences by Gisela Ruseco. She was from Colombia. It was notable because she referenced Stephen Harding, who passed away also, last year. He was one of the proteges of James Lovelock and a founder of Shoemaker College. Really cool. I think this was the final plenary then that I attended was on climate change degrowth. Julia Steinberg, the University of Lausanne, and Carlo Buontempo is the director of Copernicus Climate Service of the European Union. And he told us basically, there had been a big data dump of climate data that had just come out. I'm sure you all saw it, and it was dominating our news feeds for a day or two last summer. and the news was not good. He went through some of that data with us. But what was really interesting is that he emphasized this particular chart as being the scariest thing. This is a chart of sea level rise. And what he said really made it so scary is that the data is just so clear. This is going back to 1992, all the way to the present. And you don't even have to draw that dotted extrapolative line. You can just look at the actual data itself and see that very, very clear trend. The sea levels are rising, and as he pointed out, there's just no stopping this. It's going to continue for the rest of our lives. And yeah, these are some basic things that I know, and I think you know. But I was reminded once again, do we do a sufficient job to communicate these basics? Because as somebody pointed out in one of these sessions, some people hear this information and they're like, why wasn't I told about this? Even in 2024, even in 2025, we still need to get the word out about these basic facts. And then the final session that I did attend, the final concurrent session, a workshop on how language affects climate and on radical inclusion of the non-human in the language of non-humans by these two guys from the university in Krakow. We are here too. That was the name of the session. And this particularly got my attention because it may sound crazy, but I am partnered with this live oak tree on the board of the Gaian Way. The tree doesn't really have, the tree can't speak English anyway. So I do my best to try to represent the interests of this tree and of trees generally when we have our Gaian Way board meetings. So all very interesting. I was done with the conference at that point, went wandering through Pontevedra, discovered that what they call a tortilla is what we call a Spanish omelet for reasons that are obscure. And we had this graffiti was really interesting to me because it looks like that window. Okay, sorry. Enough digressions. I should tell you that we had our final dinner that evening. I learned that scallops do come in those shells that are indeed the symbol of remember El Camino, the way, that pilgrimage that I told you about? That's the symbol because this is some of the local seafood that people enjoy. And that evening, I wasn't able to make it to the actual gathering, but they did get together and sing the degrowth song. Yes, there is a degrowth song. In fact, it was written at the 2023 conference. The 2023 degrowth conference was held in Zagreb, and the legendary Croatian singer-songwriter Darko Rundek apparently was in attendance and was inspired to write the degrowth song. So they gathered together again there in Pontevedra and sang it again. And I'll sing you a real just quick abbreviated version of it. What does degrowth mean? Is it a missile word against economic growth? A boom, 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 boom. What does degrowth mean? Is it a deprivation of all we want to hold? Ho, 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 hold. Or is it the end of the careless living? Or is it learning the art of giving? 'Cause we all know less is more. What earth you've got in mind? What if you look inside you, seeing the life as one that we all belong to? Seeing the life as one that we all belong to. Seeing the life as one that we all belong to. I can't think of a better summation kind of the Gaian Way philosophy. Again, that's why I was there. I learned this song since then. learned to play it with a neighbor of mine who lives just down the street. We've performed it here at City Park in New Orleans for a, uh, a celebration, a seasonal celebration. And I think that, words, poems, music, even silly presentations like the one I'm giving now are important parts. We have to have a, uh, a full cultural celebration of degrowth in order to really move it forward. It can't just be academic journal articles, as important as those may be. It can't just be conferences for the academic elite, as important as that may be. Well, it's time for us to leave Pontevedra. I was really excited to, on the way out, as we walked out of Pontevedra to the train station, I was excited to take this Greenway because I've been involved in building a Greenway here in New Orleans. So here's the Pontevedra version. And so nice shot of the Spanish countryside as we made our way on train back to Madrid. I don't know what your opinion is of Madrid, but I think it's kind of a strange city. It's a huge city. It's a world city, but it only has 4.5 skyscrapers. It's kind of weird. You see the half one peeking out from behind one of the others. We didn't have any time to spend in Madrid, but I mean, no time to speak of. We did make a point, though, to actually walk away from the train station and stage this photo to make it look as if we'd spent some time in Madrid. That's it. My daughter took this photo of me. You can see my knee brace still hobbling around. We had to hurry, though, back, take the train to the Madrid airport and navigate our way through the very confusing systems there. And my daughter fulfilled a lifelong dream of patronizing a McDonald's in another country there at the Madrid airport. I was horrified, but what can you do? Um, and then, yeah, we flew to London to spend the night in London, and they have a very bizarre system. If you ever stay at the Sofitel at the Heathrow Airport, you have to actually put your room key card into this slot inside the room to activate the electricity. Found it super confusing. Just a word to the wise. We didn't have time to do anything in London except just to say that we did. We did take the what do you call it? The tube the next morning to visit Osterley House, which is just the nearest point of interest that we could possibly manage. There's my daughter on the front steps of Osterley House and visiting the used clothing store there. We had to hurry back to the airport just in time to catch the Washington Post publishing a degrowth article. Yeah, on the way out, the New York Times published a positive article. On the way back, the New York Times published this very negative opinion piece. Name attached to it, strangely enough. Degrowth is deranged. Well, if you'd asked me a month earlier, I would have said that degrowth is largely ignored by the American media. But here we have the New York Times and the Washington Post with articles in close succession. Maybe maybe degrowth is finally getting some attention. Well, those were some final thoughts, a lot to think about as I made my final airplane flight. There's a few things I do have to mention. I made those connections in Pontevedra, in Galicia, in Spain. When I got back home, this article was written about my visit and published on that news site in Spanish. So I thought that was pretty cool. You can see a picture of the Gaia Cycles of Gaia calendar there. And those intercultural connections and collaborations are continuing even to this day. I did want to spotlight also the International Degrowth Network that has come out of these repeated meetings of this International Degrowth Conference has led to the formation of this network to really push the work along. You can actually join as an individual or via an organization. For example, the Gaian Way is a member. So I have been participating in this International Degrowth Network. You can find more at degrowth.net. They have different circles. I might call attention, for example, to the Transformative Learning Circle. Touches on some of the same things that we talk about at POD. A lot of it is focused on the International Degrowth Conference and how they could make that conference more transformative in its learning practices. I seem to have found my place in this network with the social media circle. If you're looking for more information, though, about degrowth, I would say the best place to start, if you're really wanting to get started, take a deep dive, whatever, degrowth.info. That's the website I would point people to for starters. And of course, I do have to also mention the Degrowth Institute, which was just founded last year in 2024 in Chicago. There's not as much movement on degrowth in the United States. So it was pretty exciting to see this founded by another Gaian Way board member, the Degrowth Institute in Chicago. They are currently working right now to organize a degrowth summer school in Chicago this summer. And if you want to get involved in helping to plan that, they're looking for people. So visit degrowthinstitute.org and get in touch. And I do have to plug my radio program, Earth Eclectic. We're up to episode 41 now. But way back at episode 15, if you go into our archives at eartheclectic.org, you should be able to find your way. I'm not sure we got back to episode 15 there, but anyway, you'll find us on Mixcloud. Well, you can find episode 15, which is our degrowth episode, which is all about music from the conference, music from that part of the world, music about degrowth, songs of degrowth, degrowth as celebrated by different musical artists and so forth. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your patience, which if you're still with me must be infinite. And I'm happy, if we have any dialogue or questions or thoughts, comments, complaints, happy to hear from you.